Welcome to the Marvel Cinematic University podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Canton III, and we are concluding our coverage of the Disney Plus Star Wars series, The Acolyte. And episode 8, the final one, is called The Acolyte. And what myself and Jake are acolytes for is the MC University Patreon, patreon.com/MC University Power. You can get our bonus content. Just released another edition, finally, of Good Beef is back, the show where I interview our patrons and let them drive the show. Appreciate Montel for joining us there. And of course, it's $3 to get in there and get the Discord and all of our wonderful things. But in the meantime, and as you're watching this right now, you see these wonderful faces on the screen. Like, comment, subscribe, all of those things on the YouTube channel. And with that being said, let me introduce the panel. The super producer, Jake Christie, is first. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well, but AC, can I ask you a question? What is that you're wearing?
Oh, yes. So if you see it on the screen, let me just lift up a little bit. That is a shirt that I now have. It's the Washed Agenda shirt, which we are selling currently on tpublic.com. Jake, if you kindly would put in the episode description.
Of course, I've been, I
Yes.
gotta, my hat is apparently back ordered, but I'll get it at some point.
Yeah, so we have those shirts. You got hats, you got tanks, you got hoodies, you got the whole 9 yards if you want to support the brand of #Washed Agenda. Yes, sir. And that is Jake Christie. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well. Just wanted to make sure that got plugged in up top. I saw the shirt. I love the way it looks. I'm so happy we finally made it.
Oh, man, I feel definitely in my element, especially with a lot of the conversation going on online for the last couple of days. It really fits the bill. But we do have a guest. We do have a special guest. First timer, we have Arezou Amin from the GeekyWaffle and also a Star Wars insider. And it's great to have a Star Wars insider here with us to give us the deets on everything going on with this show and much more. Arezou, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to finally be joining y'all. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Wonderful stuff. And usually what I would do with somebody who hasn't been on the show at all previously while we were reviewing a series or a movie or anything along those lines, I'd be like, what do you think of this show thus far? But we're at the end. So we should just get into the episode and we could save our season thoughts at the end of this episode. So I wanted to get your initial thoughts on the finale. How did you feel? Was it satisfying? Was there any moment that stood out to you? The storytelling overall? Give me everything you got.
I was shocked, to say the least. I think I was a little worried going into the finale purely because I'd heard Leslie Headland say in an interview that the finale was going to be satisfying, it was going to wrap things up and leave things open for the future, but that this was going to get wrapped up. And I'm like, I don't know how we're going to wrap this up in 45 minutes. But I think I had kind of gotten into my head about what exactly needed to be wrapped up, and it was really like the core of the sisters and their arc, and that's what needed to get wrapped up. So I thought that was done beautifully. So much of it stuck out to me. All of the Osha and Chimere stuff, like the which we'll get into, but their whole dynamic. Vernestra was a big thing for me, especially as a big book reader. I know people change over 100 years, but it's like, what happened to you that you changed this much over the last 100 years? Like, what did the galaxy do to you? So that was a big surprise. There's things that happened in it that shocking in the moment, but not surprising considering the whole season. But we'll get into that, I'm sure. But it stuck the landing. The TLDR, it stuck the landing.
Yes, yeah. I got the same feeling of that for me personally. We Jake and I throughout the season, especially in the first half of it, were kind of questioning where is the show going exactly, what it was going to lead to. The flashback episode in episode 3 kind of threw us off a little bit in terms of the momentum of what the show was. There were interesting characters that we saw in the first 2 episodes. And then episode 5 kind of kicked into gear, a really fun storyline to close the back half of the season. And I felt like this episode, for me personally, delivered on the things that I wanted, questions being answered and leaving certain threads out there for a potential season 2 if they decide to go that route. Jake, what did you think of the finale personally?
I think Arezou said it perfectly about that, it wrapped up the things you want it to wrap up. Because I think, too many times people get really hung up on, if they don't answer every single thread, then it's a failure. But I think the thing that they needed to do first and foremost is complete the transformation of the two sisters. Because like by episode 5, you kind of get the vibe of like, okay, what the show is showing is these two sisters who start off on opposite sides of the Force, and they're going to end up switching places basically. Like that's kind of the idea, and I think that goes back to something that I observed in episode 3. I remember I pointed out, and I didn't expect this to be like as heavy of a theme, but like if you see the May and Osha as kids, May is actually the one who feels like more of a rule follower who would make more sense being a Jedi, and Osha seems like the one who's more about her emotions and make more sense being a Sith. And so I think that like the fact that those character traits are actually, it's what made May stop following Chimera's orders, and it's what made Osha ultimately, kill Soul. So like those traits ended up being the ultimate, like that ended up coming into play that like, oh no, this is actually kind of what they're meant to be. They're actually, it doesn't fit the archetype of a Sith, and Osha doesn't fit the archetype of a Jedi. And so seeing that done successfully was really satisfying. And I like that there are a lot of questions. I'm glad that they didn't rush, Chimera Vernestra confrontation, because like this episode didn't really have the space for it. I like it, they kind of just alluded to it, and it's like if they pick up a season 2, that's something you can go into. I thought that the end of Soul's arc, I think, was really the part where I was most impressed with, the way that he simultaneously was like obviously in the wrong, obviously like pathetic in a way that I really appreciated, but also sympathetic still in a way. Yeah, I just like that there was no I like that it was pathetic. I like that the speech wasn't like, you weren't wrapped up and it's like, oh no, this is a man trying to justify his own sins. This is not a grand gesture of I was doing my best. It's like, oh no, this is like when like a father who treated his kids badly is like, I'm sorry I didn't do better. Like that's what it feels like. It's not actually noble what he's saying, and I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, I thought it's interesting. The way that his character unravels throughout the season is one of the most, I think, well told portions of this story, where
Mm-hmm.
we see him at the start, and as I had alluded to, such an empathetic, such a giving and caring person. And then you realize that all of those things are because of something that he is holding on to so desperately, the grip of the idea, I need a Padawan. I need somebody to care about. I need somebody to have, which is the antithesis of who the Jedi are supposed to be. And as that grip continues, as these characters, are intertwined throughout the season, and we get to this point, this person is a shell of himself. It is really the desperation, the depression, the frustration, that all of these things that you see from him is so fascinating. And then when Osha comes out and he finally is faced with one of the things that I was so happy that we got to see was him finally owning up to it, to her via May. I think that was great to see. It was very well done. I love the force choke from Osha. That was something that I marked out for. Um, Arezou, how did you feel about Soul's journey culminating here, and what that looked like in this final episode?
I think when you get to this point narratively where we now officially know what really happened on Brendock, I think you sort of expect in conventional narrative for the character to also have this moment of realizing like what they did was wrong. Like they'll start to see things through our eyes because we, the audience, now see it a certain way. And what surprised me was Soul didn't. Like he maintained right through that conversation with May. He's like, I did the right thing. I did what was necessary. And the thing is, you can kind of see where he's coming from. He did what was necessary for this orphaned girl whose entire family just died. But because of the beliefs that he has lived with his whole life as a Jedi, he's not taking that one step back to realize the only reason this girl is orphaned is because y'all intervened where you shouldn't have. And he's not he doesn't make that connection. And I think even in his final moments when like Osha is force choking him and like the last thing he says to her is it's okay. Like kind of it's okay that this is where it's ended up. Almost like it made me think of like Han Solo touching Kylo Ren's face right before he fell off the bridge. It was this, I love you, I absolve you if that's what you need. I understand why it's come to this point. I think for Soul, he maybe even hasn't quite realized that what he did was wrong.
Yeah.
But he's maybe realized that what he did hurt Osha. And I think that is something he realized at the end, even if he really didn't make that full connection.
because the thing about the Jedi is they are fundamentalists, and the thing about the word fundamentalist, if you break it down, is that it is fundamental. That like the Force, the way that they experience the Force, is the bedrock of everything they believe in. And so I remember when we watched, last episode, I was making the point that like, if you actually believe that the only correct way to use the Force is the way the Jedi do, and that any other way is a perversion and evil, you do think that you're saving these girls. You think that they're using a perverted version of the Force. So I think that, like, as modern audiences will live in pluralistic societies, we're like, why can't they disagree? It's like, no. The Jedi don't allow for that. It's based on the idea that the only way, obviously this is not strictly true always, but like that to use the Force in another way, inherently there's something suspicious, there's something dangerous. And so like he can't bring himself to see it from our perspective because he's like, yeah, but they were evil, they used the Force wrong. So like obviously I was still, and I think that the reason why he's still a sympathetic character to me in a way, well obviously not as sympathetic as he was at the beginning, is because of what you just said, where it's like he does see that he hurt her, and that like he is not unique as a Jedi in his shortcomings. The way that the Jedi work is that they all would have this thought. I mean, obviously, Indar was more hesitant, but they all think that the only way to practice the Force is the way that they do it. So it's like part of the Jedi indoctrination is to believe, like, to believe that there's other ways to practice the Force that are ethical is to believe that water isn't wet. Like, it's not a thing that he can bring himself to do. And so I like that he didn't have a massive come to Jesus moment. But at the same time, he is still an empathetic person, so he's not going to be defiant about it, and that's complex. And I see a lot of people, really being like, "Oh man, he was a piece of shit the whole time." It's like, I guess he was, but like, the thing I appreciated is that he's a piece of shit in the way that people are pieces of shit. He's not a piece of shit in the way that movie characters are pieces of shit.
Right. And it's funny. As this has kind of evolved and gotten to the point where you get to this culmination of what this character has been throughout the season, and I really felt it was such a justified ending because in our last episode, Arezou, just for full clarification, I called Soul a dickhead at the start of it
Which
because
he is.
I just was like, come on, man, like I don't know what's going on, and why he went to this level, and obviously Indara rips him for it, and then he's even further, he goes after Torben, and then it turns into the thing where he kills Anasea and all this other stuff. So I'm left so disappointed in this character who I really felt something for in terms of empathy and sympathy for him, because it felt like he was carrying so much. And I appreciate what Jake said there as far as we walk into this last portion of it where maybe he didn't understand what he did, but at least there is a sense of, damn, I really messed up here. So like that part of it is always interesting with the Jedi, and I would love to get into the Jedi as a whole with Vernestra in a second. But as we stand with Soul, there were a bunch of other people there, so we should talk about them. But first, before I get into that, let's get into the actual, because I will say about this season, this has been some of the best fight choreography, lightsaber duels, battling that I have seen in Star Wars. Incredibly impressive. Arezou, do you have any thoughts on what you saw in this episode or just in the season in general?
Yeah. So two things. One, as a general rule, I don't care for prolonged action scenes. When I don't know why I should care. So something like Duel of the Fates, like the throne room fight, to bring it to the MCU, something like the scene where Cap and Bucky and Iron Man are fighting. Like, I know what's at stake for everybody there.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But I was worried when, I'm like, it's going to be such a fight heavy show because they keep talking about all of these fights. I'm like, what is that going to mean? But I think the show did such a good job of maintaining the stakes for everybody involved. And we know why they're fighting and we know why they care. And truly, like, there was some genuine concern about how these things would turn out. Something like the episode 5 fight with Chimera and Yord and Jackie and all that. You're thinking they're the heroes, they're going to be fine. So how are they going to be fine? And then you realize they're really not. But the way it prolonged that tension, I thought was fantastic. And I know, like, before the season started, they had talked about wanting to sort of one up Duel of the Fates, if you will. And I think we're all very nostalgically attached to Duel of the Fates, but in terms of just pure style,
Yeah.
and in terms of heart and what it means to the characters and I keep saying it, but the stakes of the fight, I think they got what they were going for.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
For a TV show, it was unbelievable. Especially the fight in this episode. Obviously, there's the two fights going on at once. The moment where they cut from the one to the other, the match cut with the legs and the lightsabers, is
Oh, that was
beautiful.
so good.
The thing I really appreciated though in this one, where they have May and Osha fighting each other, and a thing that I've kind of not loved. I understand it, but I feel like in this show so far, when May and Osha are together, they do a lot of reverse shot to cheat with the twins, which is what you have to do. But like, because you can tell they're doing the thing where you see someone's back of their head, it's not Amanda Stenberg. But this, they really made it look great. I mean, it doesn't look as good as when Michael Fassbender plays Recorder with himself in Alien Covenant, but nothing does. But like, other than that, it's just like it looked really good, and you can tell. I like when shots like that do stuff on purpose because they know how they're doing it. And so they move the camera in ways that would be impossible to do if they were just like doing the traditional one person on one side, one person on the other side. And so like I really like that they do that. So it kind of, I don't know, maybe just because I'm always looking for stuff like that. But I love when they're like, no, you think you know how we're doing this, but we're not doing it that way. We're actually like on a whole other level. And like what you said, Arezou, about it, that if they showed stakes and the characters fought in ways specific to themselves, especially in the Soul Chimera fight this episode, they did not fight like each other. They fought in distinctive ways that reveal things about their personality. And like, yeah, I think that when action can tell character, it is as valuable as any piece of dialogue.
Yes, yes. And the one thing I'll add on Soul and Chimera, and it's interesting to look at both of their lightsaber duels in episode 5 and this one. And episode 5 felt like Soul was a little caught off guard by this incredibly powerful person. And in this episode, we see Soul fighting for his life and also resolute in that I'm ready to finish this guy off, which I thought was really cool. And because he even says it, I will destroy you if that's what I have to do. And the fact that he's upended by not only May but then Osha is just kind of like a perfect way to end his arc, as he messed up both of their lives so
Yeah.
many years earlier. And this was just I thought it was a perfect way to end his arc, and I thought that was cool. So, in terms of just the overall action sequences this season, it's been a lot of fun for sure. So let's talk about the sisters, or the same being, as that's who they are. May and Osha are the same being. We are left in a different spot with them as the season concludes, as May has her mind wiped by Chimera, and Osha has now turned to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
Arezou, I want to ask you, how did you feel about this development? Even though, as Jake said, it felt like the setup was always there. How did you feel in seeing it in actuality, and where this potentially could land for both of them going forward?
I loved it. I was rooting for Osha to fall to the dark pretty early on.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of a corruption arc. I really wanted Rey to kind of play with the dark side a bit in the sequel trilogy, so I feel like I'm getting that now. But what I liked about where we find them right at the end is it is in such an opposite place to where they started the season, both, emotionally in terms of what side they're fighting for, but also sort of the role they're playing, because Osha starts the season estranged from the Jedi, doing her own thing, and May ends the season entrenched with the Jedi. She's working with them now. And then on the flip side, May starts the season, she's Chimera's acolyte, she's his apprentice, but the first time we see the two of them together, she's on the island. He's talking to her, but he's at such a distance. He's far away. He's standing up on like some sort of rocky
Yes.
outcrop. He's physically above her. He's talking to her. He's got his back to her. And Osha and Chimera end standing side by side on the same level, hand in hand. So they are at such an opposite place from where May and Chimera were, just like Osha's relationship with the Jedi was so opposite to where May's is now. So I think that was such an interesting reversal to see at the end of the season, like how far they've come from where they started out.
Yeah,
So
a
that's
genuine
why I want to see.
partnership. It
I
felt
want to
like.
see where this goes.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting. I thought that the way that these two characters have developed has been interesting. It felt like we got more obviously of Osha because she feels like the central figure of
Mhm.
this, and May took a little bit of a backseat towards this end portion, but I'm curious to see what they might do with her going forward. But Jake, I'll ask you, what did you think of the overall arc between the now that we know two beings in May and Osha?
I mean, I think it like I said earlier, it just was it. I think a thing that Leslie Headland has talked about a lot is like a thing doesn't need to be like shocking or it doesn't need to be surprising in order to be good. And like just because like that kind of was what was telegraphed, like I think that it's still satisfying to see how it happens. And I was interested in how they were going to do May's arc because Osha's is easy, but you're like, okay, how is May going to be good when she did kill 3 Jedi? Oh, sorry, 2 Jedi because she didn't kill Naka. Um, uh, but the the way of wiping her mind, I think, is like a very interesting. Like it felt when I first started, I'm like, is that like kind of a cheat? But I'm like, no, it's not cheat at all. It's like this is what she would be like if the events never happened, and if the events never
Yeah.
happened, she would be good because she not say there's good and bad, but like she is, like I said, like a perfectly designed pupil. Like she was a great pupil to her mothers in the same way that she'll be a great pupil for the Jedi, and so I'm excited to see what happens with her in a season 2. I can imagine that a season 2 might be more May heavy because we got a very Osha heavy show. Um, but yeah, I think that like the ways that they're similar and the ways that they're different are like that's what the whole tension of the show is. And because I think it's easy to act like they're just complete opposites, but obviously they're not. Obviously they have things similar. And I don't know the way that when Osha decides to go to the dark side, how kind of easy it is for her. Because although like it's been over a whole season, she's really only been thinking about it for a couple days, and like clearly a part of her is interested. Like she's it does. Whereas May, you can imagine, was much more reluctant because she is not like she wanted to use the dark side as a conduit to get revenge, which like that's not really you're not really part of the dark side if you're just
Yeah.
using it to get something else. So I don't know. That's a rambling answer, but my answer is that I thought it was really good.
Okay, so Arsu, I feel like you would have a good understanding of this. So obviously, Jake and I are not all the way in on the High Republic stuff and some of the stuff that occurred previously on Star Wars, the books, and all of those things. So we see a Sith Lord in this episode,
Mhm.
very briefly. Very briefly, he goes by the name of Darth Plagueis.
The
Who?
Wise.
Yes, the Wise. Who is Darth Plagueis the Wise? Fill us in a little bit.
Oh my god! You're asking me about the one book I haven't read. But at, in the High Republic books, the Sith are not there.
Yeah.
They are an ancient thing that hasn't been seen for 1,000 years, and they're just
Mhm.
kind of a concept.
Yep.
Um,
Like
I
the
am
Dallas
so
Cowboys being
sorry.
good at football. Sorry. I thought of that joke late. Sorry.
I feel like I got this whole setup about the books, and I'm like now admitting my blind spots is that there's a lot of legends I haven't read. So all I know about Plagueis is what we know in the movie.
Hmm.
So I
Okay, I'm intrigued.
that
Sometimes
answers
I just sit by
why.
myself and I said, have you heard the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
I feel like I want to read it now
Yeah.
that I know, just
But
to
his
kind
whole
of fill that
deal,
in. But
correct me if I'm wrong, is that he is the one who tried to create life. That the idea,
yes,
I think what they're implying is that in some ways he was inspired by whatever happened with May and Osha. That like he got that's how he learned how to create life and eventually possibly created taught Palpatine how to create Anakin, I guess, is what we're eventually
isn't
supposed.
that just the way where somebody's taking credit for someone else's idea? But
Yes,
I
I
do.
definitely
Yeah, he
saw
is.
that tweet. I saw a tweet that was like, "I'll leave it to a old white guy to steal a black woman's idea." Is what I saw.
Well, so I do think that because we know from the sequels that Palpatine is so obsessed with this concept of a dyad, and something I've been saying from the beginning is I before we knew they were like the same person,
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, one but born is two, that's two halves of a soul, that's a dyad. So I thought that's where they were going with Osha and May. So I think with Chimere bringing Osha like back to the island, to the planet, and him
Mhm.
kind of seeing this, the jury in my mind is still out on whether or not Chimere even knows that Plagueis is
Mhm.
there. He might
Mm.
not, but I think this is going to serve as like you said, Jake, that introduction to Plagueis now wanting to create life and to all that, and then pass that on to Palpatine. So it does set that up, but it also does beg the question of Palpatine's the apprentice we know. So what happens to Chimere?
Nothing.
Yes.
I'm like, he and Osha are going to walk off into the sunset together and be like, you know what? The Sith business is not for us. We quit. And they're going to go. I'm aware that's a little bit wishful thinking on my part, but
AO3 is around, so you can do whatever you want.
Listen, AO3 is bumping right now.
I'm sure there's a lot of bumping on AO3 right now. What was that tweet you saw? What you said earlier, AC was.
Oh my gosh!
I'll pull it up.
Yeah, pull it up. That one was just tremendous.
It was God, vamp. Quote: "The new Acolyte's training must be going well. All I hear is clapping." Darth Plagueis.
I did see that one.
But that's just tremendous stuff, man. Yeah.
Like all of that aside, I think the implications for this being Plagueis, who even if all you know about him is the movie, you know his whole deal is creating life, and Soul's whole deal with May and Osha was they were created, they through a vergence in the Force. So I think he's taking notes, he's putting the pieces together.
Yeah. Oh, it's another fun plot thread that please Disney Plus folks, let's get a season 2 of this thing. Let's do this. Okay, so I was saving Vernestra for here because to me, I've been throughout the entire series to this point, Vernestra's arc has been probably even more interesting than anything I've watched on this show. Even though I like a lot of the characters and I'm intrigued and a lot of the struggles, the emotions and stuff like that. The stuff with Vernestra and the Senate. Yeah. And the fact that we finally got something with that in this episode, I almost wished we had gotten a little something more previously because it was so engaging. And I think it was David Harewood who played the senator in this episode, and that was a hell of a performance by him.
I pulled the quotes up. I have them up. I wish if Disney was not so litigious, someone should put the ether beat under this. I mean, he really, these are good. Here's mine. I think the Jedi are a massive system of unchecked power, posing as a religion, a delusional court that claims to control the uncontrollable. We don't control the Force, not the Force. Your emotions. You project an image. You project an image of goodness and restraint, but it's only a matter of time before one of you snaps. And when, not if. If that happens, who will be strong enough to stop him? That's a bar.
He's asking great questions.
I love that because this is mass entertainment. I love that they kind of there's obviously a lot of themes of the show, but that this is obviously a theme of the show, and it's like, let's have a character say it and let's underline it. Like, there's no mistake. Like, this is the theme of the show, that you cannot be a religion and also be the cops and also be the government. That is not, and I'm glad that they have a guy who's just like, this is kind of crazy that cop priests are ruling the galaxy. Anyone else want to take a look at this?
Oh my gosh. Arezou, how did you feel about this? Because I thought more so than anything else, like Jake said, this needed to be called out. This needed to be a thing, especially with the way that Vernestra has been moving this season. Very behind the scenes, very orchestrating a lot of things. She frames Soul, which, is a lot by itself. The, not revealing Chimere and that whole deal, that there's so much going on there. What did you make of not only that conversation that she has with the senator, but just overall how she moves in this episode, just very, very dastardly, in my opinion.
So this is where I get to bring the book stuff in, because Vernestra is a big character in the High Republic books. She's one of the main characters. And when we first meet her, she's 16 years old and a Jedi Knight. And she's the prodigy. So she passed her trials at 15 at like the encouragement of her master, and other Jedi are like, maybe he shouldn't have pushed you to pass your trials that early. I don't think you're ready. But she's like, I'm ready. I got this. So she's under a tremendous amount of pressure all through the books, because, it was one thing after another. All of this stuff is going wrong. They've got these space pirates, the Nile, that they're dealing with. And she is, like I said, she's the prodigy. She's the one who is trying to do the right thing. She's the one who wants to be in tune with the Force and the needs of the galaxy. She has a whole, essentially, gap year where she like walks away from the Jedi Order informally because they're not really keeping track of anybody in the wake of a disaster. She kind of walks away and she's like down with the people and she's figuring it out. This is where Vernestra is in the books. Come to 100 years later, and she is, like you said, she's making these political moves. She's telling Soul about their political enemies. She's trying to, sort of play the political game. She frames Soul purely to avoid an external investigation of the Jedi Order. There's no other reason to do that. She wanted to make it seem to Senator Rayencourt that, well, we've got it under control. It was a Jedi who killed Jedi. Like it's our deal. You don't need to get involved. And that didn't work out. He's like, no, we need to investigate anyway because like what? So she makes this really not shady move, but this really kind of uncharacteristic move of blaming her friend for the deaths of these people to try to save this order she's like working so hard to protect, and it didn't work. It kind of got pulled out from under her anyway, which is like the tragedy of like you sold your soul sort of, and at what cost. And but the thing is too that she is the product of the Jedi Order of 100 years ago that wasn't really involved with the government, but in the wake of all of these large-scale galaxy-wide disasters kind of became a branch of the government. They were supplementing the Republic Defense Coalition. They were getting involved at a political senatorial level. They were friendly with the chancellors. So she is a product of 100 years of that, and it's culminated in this. So this is the tragedy of Vernestra Rwoh, is that she's basically like Soul, a product of her system, but the system is hurting people.
And the parallels to real life are not hard to see. Think about how many people who start off as idealists who genuinely do make positive change, and then in order to end up trying to defend that positive change, end up being really toxic to the systems that they're in. And I think that that's very interesting, because that's obviously much more interesting than someone who is like, oh, like this from day one, In conclusion, it's not easy being green. AC, what were you going to say?
No, it's definitely not easy being green. And also, I think, I've come to the conclusion after watching this series is that I feel like, if anything, if I had like a major critique, I feel like they should even lean more into this. These conversations and these back and forths, and basically what Vernestra's doing, and she moves into center focus now if this story continues. This is kind of like the stuff that great TV is built on. I mean, we talk about Andor being such a tremendous show, and one of the reasons why is because we are examining the Empire and how they became fat cats and couldn't see this uprising, this rebellion coming for them. And now we're in the opposite position, going back even further, where the Jedi could not see that this uprising from the Sith was coming, because essentially they're just too worried about optics and protecting this institution. And seeing, like, now after seeing Andor and then seeing this show, that's like, I need them to lean into this more, because this kind of shows a lot of the stuff that Jake and I talked about in the earlier parts of this series, where this power being unchecked, what difference does it make if it's the Sith or the Jedi if they're essentially doing different versions of the same control? And this is the great question, and this is why I appreciate this series so much, in having the ambition to dive into those waters even further than other Star Wars properties have. And that's why, like, I'm really like enjoying that part of it, and I want to see that continuing going forward. Was there anything, Arezou, that you saw with Vernestra generally, or what are your views? Did your views on the Jedi change watching this show, or did you already kind of have a fixed idea, and this kind of continued that idea? What were your thoughts overall about the Jedi?
I think my thoughts on the Jedi after this show are pretty much where they were once I started reading the High Republic books. It's what it boils down to in a sentence is good people in a broken system. So there's so many of them that mean well, that do well. I still maintain that like Soul is not a bad person, and Dara is not a bad person. They just like are doing a bad thing because this is what the system has conditioned them to do. But like when it comes down to it, they mean well by most people they encounter, and they are just with I think of the line that Indara tells Soul, like, you're letting your desire for a pupil blind you, or something like that.
Yeah.
And essentially this has just reinforced the idea that they have grown up and live in a system that does not give them any way to cope with negative emotions, with difficult emotions. You kind of see that in the High Republic books. That's sort of where I was at. But earlier, because the books take place earlier, the system doesn't give them a way to cope with that, but they make a point of showing that they all have a lot of peers. So even if structurally you don't really have a way to process these difficult emotions, you have your best friends, you have kind of your graduating class, essentially, that you can all kind of lean on each other. And we're seeing more and more that that's starting to go away. You have a friend, and then you have like your master, and you have your apprentice, and that's about it. And you're kind of losing your ability to process that. And I think it's telegraphing the downfall of the Jedi, because by the time we get to Anakin, he can't even tell his master that he's like struggling with all this stuff, because they've really lost that ability. So I think in terms of how I view the Jedi, it hasn't changed. I just think it illustrates really well why they are struggling as an order, and why these good people in a broken system are struggling so much with the fact that they don't have the resources and the mechanisms to thrive as healthy individuals.
Yeah. I think that it's all of these things are inevitable, because like they think that their lack of emotions is a virtue, but like it's actually a lie, because they don't lack emotions, they just ignore them because it's impossible to not have emotions, you know. And I think that all of these things, like, you know, Soul really wanting a Padawan, to Anakin really being afraid that the mother of his children is going to die, these are all things that are human to feel. And the Jedi have convinced themselves that they don't feel those things, but of course, like I said, they're just tamping it down and ignoring it, you know. And yeah, I think like a point I made in a previous episode, I think, was like, when your structure tells you that like there is a way to do things, and like it's not about emotions and it's not about judgment calls and things like that, then you have no structure to deal with mistakes, because like what do you do? There's if emotions are never a factor, there's always going to be a right way or wrong way to do things. So like if you make a mistake like Solos, of course they're going to cover it up, because they don't have the language to talk about what happened, because like to acknowledge what happened would be to acknowledge that the Jedi all have emotions and they're all fallible. And so like, you know, they are, the fact that their legitimacy requires them to do the impossible means that you're always going to have them lying about stuff, because they are fallible. But in order for them to have any legitimacy at all, they have to be infallible. And so therefore, anyone who thinks the Jedi are a force of good is kind of forced to lie on their behalf, because it's like, well, if we let everyone know that we sometimes make mistakes, they're not going to trust us anymore. And it's like, well, maybe people shouldn't trust you to begin with then.
That's really, and it's, I love the complications of it. I love the fact that it wades into these waters and makes us think a lot about, because it's easy to be like, yeah, Soul is terrible for doing this, but is he really a terrible human being? Not necessarily. I think this is a person who kind of like lost his way, and he lost his way in a system that would not, and clearly did not, protect him from these things. And even after the fact, even in his death, he's dishonored in death by being framed for killing all these Jedi. And it's a shame that something like that happened.
And can I shout out an article I read today? Actually, I was kind of citing some of its themes, so I want to make sure I actually get it on the record. For Gizmodo, Jordan Maison, who actually wrote the tweet about Darth Plagueis and hearing clapping.
Yes, and the clapping.
So this is like a really intellectual article. So he has two modes. But Leonardo Thomas sent me this article basically about the parallels that the Jedi have to colonial powers. And a point it makes is that part of colonialism, like a thing that's so twisted about it, is that it plays on the sympathies of people. The people who are colonialists, who like indoctrinate kids and this and that and the other, the message is not you're going to be mean to these kids. Like, no, you're saving them. You're doing a good thing. Like, that is what's so twisted about it, that like by the Jedi's laws. And so I obviously I'm just reinforcing the point I'm making, but like that is why he can be is still somewhat a sympathetic character, because the emotion that he is feeling that makes him do these bad things is what we would think of as a positive emotion. He is feeling sympathy. He's feeling fear on behalf of these girls. These are things that are normally good things. But when you live in a system, like, that is the real tragedy of a broken system, is when it can turn sympathies into true evil acts.
Oh man, that's great. I gotta read that
It's
article.
a great piece. It's a great piece.
Oh, okay, yeah, I definitely got to check that one out.
I'll put it in the description as well for everyone listening.
Nice. Yeah, I think this conversation as far as the Jedi are concerned, and then you could even expand it to the Empire and kind of comparing and contrasting. It is so interesting to look at them both and how they are undone in different ways, and how these systems end up just being broken on their own, and there's just the individuals who end up having to handle things as opposed to the collective. And usually all of these things are broken from within, and that's the most fascinating part about everything that we see when it comes to whether it's empires or big time groups, whether political or even you could go to sports teams and things like that. Usually it's the stuff within.
But I thought Andy Liu was the one who broke up the dynasty. That's just for you. Sorry.
Oh goodness. But yes, you can't mention Vernestra without talking about our little pal that we see at the end of the episode. We see Yoda, and it's clear that that's who Vernestra was trying to speak to earlier in the episode, and she finally gets an audience with him. I'm wondering, is Yoda advising her on how to deal with the situation as she is moving behind the scenes? Arezou, what do you think about this development?
So going back to the books, in phase 2, which is even before phase 1, it's like the prequel phase. Phase 2 sort of explains the threat of phase 1 about 150 or so years before the threat really hits. And Yoda's got a pretty good idea of what's going on, and he decides to just remove the relevant information from the archives. So I was joking with a friend earlier that Vernestra's not going for advice. Vernestra's going to learn how to do a cover up.
Yep.
Because Yoda's got experience covering stuff up. So
that little bastard.
I don't know if that's where they're going with it, but he basically just put, we don't need this in the archives. And then 150 years later, the Jedi are scrambling, going, we don't know what this is because the information's not in the archives. Yeah. So I don't think it's going to be quite to the scale of how do I gaslight the galaxy, but it's going to sort of be my apprentice is back, because Yoda 100% knew that she had an apprentice. Yeah. There's no way he didn't know. He's not dead. My apprentice is back. And now he's a Sith with an apprentice of his own. And surprise, surprise, it's Soul's former apprentice. Yeah. So I feel like she's just going to go to him and explain all this. I don't know how much help he's going to be. But I feel like she's hit the point where she now thinks she needs advice. All joking about cover up aside, I think she just kind of wants to know how to proceed, especially with Chimera.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yoda is just really a character who, when you break it down, is just taking way more L's than W's. Really. And I love Yoda. He's a great character. I think that's why he's a great character. But, really just truly bad at his job in most moments. And I think that that's so fascinating that, where people compare themselves to him. It's he's good at being the old guy who teaches you a couple new tricks. But, in terms of being a guy to prevent the Sith from taking over the galaxy, he's pretty bad at it. But no, I think that it is... I like that he's around. I like that they didn't introduce him earlier, because, I think I loved about the show is that you didn't meet a bunch of characters you knew before. It wasn't, the Filoni, let's meet a person we met before. That's really cool. That's cool. That's cool. And so, but he is around, so it makes sense that he's there. And I think that I'm interested to see how much he knows. Because obviously a lot of people were complaining when the show first started that how do they say that the Sith have not been around for X amount of years if this show takes place? And obviously they explain that by Vernestra lies. That's how they explain it. But I want to know how much Yoda knows. How much does she tell Yoda? Because then how much is Yoda lying in episode 1? These are all things that I'd like to figure out, Mr. Iger, if you could get us a second season.
Yes, most definitely. And it's gonna be really fascinating. I'd like to with each of you, before we wind down here, I'd like to just go over the season, overall season thoughts now that it's complete. Arezou, how did you overall feel? Any particular critiques that you had of the season, or anything that you saw that you thought could have been done better, or what is something that really exceeded your expectations for this show? Just any of those particular thoughts of the season.
So I'll start with the what I wish was different is I just wish the episodes were longer.
Agreed.
I do like the streaming trend of the episodes aren't trying to fill a certain time block like they do on television. Like it's just the episodes are as long as we need them to be. But I think in the case like this, you can use that to your advantage and make them just, closer to an hour each. Especially because seasons aren't 22 episodes anymore. They're 8, they're 10.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish it had been longer so we could have had time to kind of stew in the like little moments, the little character moments in between, because we have them. But I would have liked to just linger there a little longer.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing I wish it had done differently. Narratively, I think it was solid. What surprised me, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, really is the relationship between Osha and Chimere, because we are so used to seeing this pull to the dark is menacing like it is with Palpatine, or it's tense like it is with Rey and Kylo, and I really like that dynamic. If you've ever seen me tweet anything at all, you know what a fan I am of Rey and Kylo. But I think they were kind of the downside to that is purely in the way, you had different visions in each movie, and it kind of was all over the place, especially towards the end. But the fact that they leaned in so hard to this friendlier dynamic, this more intimate dynamic, this idea of a literal seduction to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
I was not expecting that in a Disney Plus Star Wars show. I'm like, that's something for the books. That's something for AO3. Nobody is literally seduced to the dark side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's literally what's happening here. And I was just shocked that they went that way. And I'm so happy they did.
Yeah, it's really clear that, like, obviously it's not text, but it is like blaring subtext that part of the appeal of the dark side is how hot Chimera is. Like that, and they want to they want to have sex with each other. Like that's a thing that's like, and obviously that is there with Raylo, but like this is just, I think, way more on the surface. And like I think that this honestly feels like it was written by someone who has in her day consumed a lot of fanfic, because it's like, no, this is what's actually going on between these two characters. This is way more about the people, like I think that was something that's really interesting to me too, is that like people in real life don't do things for ideological reasons. Most people are not actually ideological. People do things with like people they know and like what they feel instinctually, and then they come up with an ideology afterwards. And like I wouldn't believe it if it was like Osha actually believes in the ideology of the dark side. Like, no, she is. If it was not for Chimere, she wouldn't just decide to join the dark side. She wants to be in proximity to this person. This person is appealing, and what the dark side has done for him is appealing in a way that is like attractive. And so, yeah, it was just really well done. And I think that the world is better for all of the shots we have had of Manny Jacinto's arms. Just really incredible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that I love the fact that she kept using the word seduce. It's like, yes, that's what this is. This is not, this is not heady. This is like base emotions.
I think the benefit they have, Osha and Chimere have over like the Raylo of it all, the biggest benefit they have is time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because they have so much more time as a series to spell this out, whereas we're trying to make a meal out of these few scenes that the two of them get to share across 3 movies. And then 2, the fact that the third part of the movie pulls back quite a bit from where
does the Rise of Skywalker pull back on stuff that the other movies did? I didn't know this.
It pulls it back. So then we're like trying to get back to that point we were at the end of 8, starting from like an episode 7 point. So they don't, and then of course there's the rest of the movie is happening. So like,
I don't know. The Rise of Skywalker didn't undo a bunch of the good stuff that 8 did. I would know about that if that happened.
But like, what I mean is like they have.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I'm just doing a bit.
No, I know. But like, but what I wanted to say too is what I loved about their dynamic is the fact that I saw somebody make this point on Twitter, and I could not agree more. Was that all Chimere does is ask some questions and just kind of be like, "Is that what you want?" And if she'd been like, "You know what? Yeah, I'm super happy with the way Jedi do things," he probably would have dropped it. but he can feel she's not happy with it. So he's
Yeah.
going, is that like, wouldn't you rather explore this? Like, that kind of seems like something you'd be interested in. Lets her come to that conclusion.
Exactly.
So it's not Palpatine holding like a metaphorical knife to like Luke's throat, being like, join the dark side, kill your dad, rule the galaxy. It's Chimere, and to an extent, like what Kylo does is just going, this is the uncomfortable truth of your situation. How does that make you feel? And then them having to decide what they want to do with that information.
No, man, that's great stuff. I think their relationship, I mean, to your point, Arezou, is one of the more surprising elements in how much I enjoyed it, how much it came off on the screen, and you could see the chemistry, you could see it grow, and you kind of want to see what's next for those two. That's interesting. Hand in hand as the episode concludes. It was not somewhere in episode 5 I expected this to go. So this is pretty, that from that standpoint is pretty cool. But Jake, I'll ask you in terms of the season, any big critiques or anything that you thought exceeded your expectations?
I mean, my critiques are mostly things I've already said, and so I'm not going to repeat them. But
sure,
the thing that that was really a breath of fresh air about it is that, like, a thing I think people forget about George Lucas is that he was not he had, American Graffiti was his big movie beforehand, which is not a genre movie; it's a character movie. And I think that a lot of Star Wars, even stuff I love, I'm a huge defender of The Last Jedi. I love that movie. But like Rian Johnson's a guy who's written a lot of genre stuff, and he can get humans, but he's a genre guy. J.J. Abrams obviously a genre guy. George Lucas, by the time he was doing the prequels, was all in genre. Filoni, very genre. Jon Favreau was now in genre world. I think it just was so interesting to have someone like Leslie Headland, who's in today's day and age out of left field to make a big sci-fi series. Like that's not her background really. I think you could just, the human touches of the characters were a thing I've really missed from particularly the Disney Plus shows. I mean, Andor had it to some extent, but Andor is so like political thrillery where it's like not as much about, like the characters are very much not plot functions, but it's a little different. But these
it's more about the move.
Yeah, these just felt like super human characters in a way that I really appreciated. Because that is the thing too about, I think is underrated with Star Wars, is that like the characters in Star Wars are not really like, Luke is so much more human than you would think on paper for the story is. Like, these are very human characters, and Osha and May, their emotions felt much more similar to emotions that people experience than like, it's not about grand ideas of a rebellion or an empire. Not that I don't love those things, but like this, at every turn, these characters' motivations were human, and I think that that's something you get when you bring in new blood. And I hope it is an example to other big franchises to be like, hey, bring in someone who loves this, but is not coming at it from like, all of my influences are these other sci-fi movies that I'm going to pick and choose from. Like, that's fine and dandy, but it's like, no, I want to see what someone who tells one type of story, the type of story they would tell in the sandbox. And it was really something I noticed throughout.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll say that I felt like the structure in the first half of the season left a lot on the table in terms of like what I probably would want to see done a little bit more tighter. I think once you got to episode 5 and got to the reveal of the stranger, you were able to like really pick up, and I thought things really moved from there. And I think that's one of those functions of where, and I think it's just a general thing with these shows, Disney Plus, Star Wars, and Marvel to a degree, is sometimes when you have a story and you want to get somewhere, sometimes just like a running back hits that hole to go, just let him go. Just kind of let it go and let it cook. A little, like, let it cook immediately. Like I mentioned with the Vernestra Senator stuff, we could have sprinkled some scenes in, and this is where it fits into your point, Arju, as far as episode length and even episode count to a degree. I think there's always stuff that you can add that makes a lot of sense and could be more instructional and more interesting to add to the story. So I feel like there's definitely stuff that these Star Wars shows can improve on. The thing that exceeded my expectations about this show, I'll say more than anything else, and I've said it before, but I really want to hit this point home, is the show's ambition.
Yeah.
I think the show's ambition in what it was trying to do and the story it was trying to tell is so refreshing on so many levels. Because Jake mentions the humanity. Arezou, you mentioned the relationship between Chimere and Osha and those things that you don't get in Star Wars, things that you don't see on screen. In a lot of instances, we talk about the Jedi being this very robotic, group. This Jedi Order is very robotic and lacking of emotion and things of that nature. We saw an emotional Jedi. We saw what would happen to an emotional Jedi and how many problems that would cause. We saw the Jedi covering up all of these terrible atrocities that they committed, the mistakes that were made, certain conversations that were had, all of these things that occurred, I felt like mattered in a way. It's stuff that normally you wouldn't feel the same because of how robotic some of these relationships are and how kind of monotonous that these relationships can be that we've seen in other things. No, this didn't feel like that. This felt like these were human people going through these things and it turned into something else, and decisions were made and it forced people out of their comfort zone. Osha, and I love the little line that she says about where she's talking about not becoming the Jedi, and the real reason that because of the grief of her mom, of losing her mom, and what that meant. So when she hears that the person that she trusted the most, who saved her, was the one who killed her mom, I can't really blame her for doing what she did, to be honest, especially when she asked him, why didn't you tell the Jedi that this happened? Like, these are valid questions. And I'm glad that this show asked valid questions and we had questionable answers come from the characters, because guess what? Human beings aren't perfect. And I'm glad that they illustrated that in that show. And we got to get some kick-ass lightsaber stuff too at the same time.
Lightsaber question, actually, for Arezou, because what is the deal? I know that in order for a lightsaber to turn red, it's that like the kyber crystal gets like corrupted, right? What exactly is going on there?
So the process is called bleeding a kyber crystal.
Mm-hmm.
And my knowledge of it primarily comes from the Rise of Kylo Ren comic, but it's and from the Ahsoka novel. But it's my understanding, and somebody I'm sure in the comments will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that when the person who has the kyber crystal is experiencing a powerful enough negative emotion that they are themselves turning to the dark side, that the kyber crystal essentially bleeds and turns red. And like Ahsoka, the reason she has white lightsabers is because she had these bled crystals from an Inquisitor, and she healed them, and they turned white as a result. But that's what's happening. Is the crystal is now bleeding because she is like falling in real time.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I also just thought, hell yeah, that looks cool.
I think it's the result of like when you like kill somebody and make that fall then, because I'm pretty sure the same thing happens with Kylo Ren. But I think there's a distinction where you do that to the lightsaber of the person you have killed, whereas the difference is Kylo Ren does that to his own kyber crystal and it cracks as a result, and that's why his blade looks all janky.
Yeah.
But that's my understanding from my memory. I read a lot in a year, so this was hundreds of books ago. But from my understanding, that's what's happening there. And it was so cool to watch it happen. And the fact that the crystal cracks and it's, you can see it turning red. And then once the blade like emits, it still hasn't fully changed. And changing before your eyes.
Yes, that was a very nice touch. And yeah, overall, like, it's so funny to watch. Before we came on, I was talking with Arezou about like some of the reactions that you see from folks online, and it is kind of funny when you read some of them. It's just like, I love the lack of media literacy. It's just incredible. It's just incredible that we see that in today, like constantly, never stops. It's just incredible to see, but. I think overall, like I'm very glad that we got to review this show, because it's a nice little change of pace for us during this time period. So this was a lot of fun, a really really good show, and I want to see a season 2. I want to see where this goes. I think this has legs. I think I'm excited if they are able to continue this, and there are plenty of different angles that they can study beyond what we saw here in this first season. Arezou, do you have any final thoughts on just generally what you saw here and what you may look forward to?
I want a season 2. I want it to focus on not only this like budding partnership with Osha and Chimera and kind of what that dynamic looks like, especially with Plagueis like living on the island. But I also want to see the Jedi in the aftermath of this huge cover up.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not they're going to realize it was a cover up. I also want to see Vernestra and Chimera's dynamic. I want to learn what happened there. I hope we get a confrontation. I want to sort of see that, because like for book readers, you've met Vernestra's first Padawan, and he's the sweetest little cupcake you've ever seen in your life. He's such a sweetheart. But and not that Chimera's not a sweetheart, but the difference between Imri and Chimera is just makes my head spin. So I really want to see what happened with that. I want to learn more about that scar on his back. What provoked it? Was it a Luke in The Last Jedi moment where she kind of reacted poorly to something that she probably should have taken a second to think about? So all of this is stuff I'm chewing on and really, really want a season 2.
Wonderful stuff. And any final thoughts from you, Jake?
No, I mean, obviously just season 2. And like I've said, I think that the way that Leslie Headland's been super available and open about her process, I think has really enriched the show. And like, obviously people have their own processes and some people like to be more guarded. But like, I found it very valuable as a viewer to where like she doesn't tell you how you're supposed to feel about things, but like knowing where she's coming from has really made it like more fun to watch. And I don't know, it also just makes me more mad at the dorks online, because it's like, read an interview with this woman for 5 minutes and tell me that she doesn't care more about Star Wars than you do. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, she clearly like is so passionate about this, and she's really funny. And like, I really have become a huge fan of hers as just a person throughout this whole process. And so like, if they don't give her a season 2 of this, I hope some other genre project, if she wants to do it, backs up a Brinks truck, because she really has shown a lot of proficiency in this, and I'm excited to see it.
Could not agree with that more. And again, to echo the thoughts of my two pals here, absolutely, season 2. Let's get that thing cooking for sure. Arezou, I want to thank you for joining us. Appreciate you lending your thoughts and your perspectives on Star Wars and the Acolyte in this episode. Where can we follow you? Where can we find your work?
So best place to find me and all my work is on Twitter. I'm at Arezou Amin on there. I'm on the GeekyWaffle, both the podcast network and writing reviews for the site. I appear occasionally in Star Wars Insider, most recently an interview with Leslie Headland. And you can also find my work on Collider, where I am also an editor.
Wonderful. And looking forward to looking and reading more of your stuff. And eventually when Star Wars comes back around, bringing you back on for some more of your thoughts.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
It's funny. I feel like honestly, I first reached out, like, honestly, it might have been almost 2 years ago. And I feel like there have been a couple times I've reached out and it just hasn't worked out. So I'm glad we finally...
It's purely because of my schedule, but I'm so glad we finally made this happen.
I'm trying to remember. I think you were originally on like the master list of nerdy people of Middle Eastern, North African descent to talk about Miss Marvel, and that was the first time I reached out. It was all
really? Okay, that's where that started. Okay,
listen, I would have loved to, because Miss Marvel is still one of my top MCU projects. It's one I will just rewatch.
Yeah,
Miss Marvel season 2.
Miss Marvel's great. But I'm remembering that's where it was, because I remember I got a master list, and we've had a bunch of people who come on again and again from that list. So hopefully you can join that as well.
Miss Marvel season 2, I will be here.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Love that. Jake Christie, where can we follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter at the J Christie, and like I said last time, I've been doing some TikToks at the J Christie of called the Museum of Twitter. I actually had one of them like blow up in a way that I really was not expecting. That like I put it up, and like within 10 minutes it had like 10,000 views. So please support me on there. I'm doing. If you have a tweet that you think is essential that needs to go in the Museum of Twitter, please let me know. I probably already have it on my master spreadsheet, because my master spreadsheet has 240 tweets on it. But just let me know just in case.
Awesome stuff. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at AnthonyCanton_3. Follow the show on all platforms at MC University Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, MC University Podcast. Make sure you do that. Like, subscribe, follow, comment, all of those things. And same thing with the podcast feed, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get podcasts. Make sure you 5-star that joint. Hit us with a wonderful review. And as I mentioned at the top, the Patreon, make sure you Subscribe to that if you haven't as of yet. We're doing a lot of fun stuff over there, and appreciate everybody for supporting and listening. For Arezou and Jake, I'm Anthony Canton III. This has been Marvel Cinematic University, and we will talk to you next time.